There were 6 cups on the table. That was the first problem. The second problem was that everyone in the room insisted there had only ever been 5 of us. I remember staring at the empty chair beside Tomas, while Professor Vin calmly asked why I had stopped taking notes. I did not answer him. There was a shallow dent in the cushion. A half-circle stain marked the table where somebody had apparently spent months putting a hot cup in exactly the same place. And tucked beneath that cup was a folded piece of paper in handwriting I recognized. Amadou, if you still remember me, do not let VENN finish the experiment. My name is Amadou Ba. I was 29 years old, a scholarship researcher at Veyra College, and I had already lived once before. My first life had been in Dakar. Different world, different rules, no memory magic, no probability sorcerers, no brass birds demanding documentary evidence whenever someone said something stupid. The last part deserves explanation. A small mechanical bird called Pico was perched on Professor Vin's bookshelf, while 5 people watched me stare at a chair belonging to someone they could not remember. Leela finally said, "Amadou." I looked at her. "What? You look ill." "I'm counting." Sam leaned sideways and counted us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pico immediately chirped, "Proof." Sam pointed at us. "The people, Pico." "Proof." "You're a machine." "Proof." Under normal circumstances, that would have made me laugh. Instead, I looked at Professor Elias Venn. He was a tall man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair, narrow shoulders, and the irritating serenity of someone who had spent 30 years, becoming very difficult to surprise. "Where is John?" I asked. Nobody moved. Not even Tomas. That frightened me more than screaming would have. Myra frowned. "Who?" "John Mercer." Blank faces. Sam smiled uncertainly. Leela looked at me as if she expected the punchline. Tomas said, "There is no John in our group." My fingers closed around the note beneath the cup. 3 nights earlier, 6 of us had entered the synchrony chamber beneath Veyra College. I remembered John insulting the tea. I remembered Sam betting him 2 silver crowns he would complain before the experiment began. I remembered Leela threatening to pour the tea over both of them. I remembered Myra checking the silver nodes around our chairs. I remembered Tomas asking Ven whether the experiment had ever been attempted with 6 disciplines simultaneously. And I remembered waking 12 hours later with bloodless white light shining through the laboratory windows, and a headache that felt like somebody had rearranged the shelves inside my skull. Now the official laboratory record said 5 participants. The duty roster said 5. The meal ledger said 5. The magical attendance seal said 5. Reality itself seemed quite confident. Unfortunately for reality, I had worked with archives before. In Dakar, before I died, I had spent years preserving old administrative records, family papers, shipping logs, damaged manuscripts, photographs, receipts, and the sort of documents important people usually ignore until they need to prove something. The grand document tells you what someone wanted remembered. The boring document tells you what actually happened. So I smiled at Professor Vin. Not because I was calm. I was absolutely not calm. I smiled because somebody had altered history and apparently forgotten that laundry existed. "Professor," I said, "how many research coats were cleaned after the experiment?" For the first time, Ven hesitated. "Only half a second." "But archivists live on half seconds." "5, he said. Pico turned his brass head. "Proof." That time nobody laughed. Veyra College had been built on a cliff above the old port city of Cairo, where pale towers rose between salt-stained streets and merchant roofs glittered with protective runes. I had wanted to study there since I was 14. Not because Veyra produced famous mages. It did. Not because its graduates became royal advisors, wealthy researchers, military architects, and people who charged ridiculous amounts of money to explain ordinary problems using very expensive magical vocabulary. They did that too. I wanted Veyra because of the deep archive. The deep archive could preserve memory. Real memory. Not a written description. Not a painting. Not a voice recorded inside a sound crystal. A memory stored properly in the deep archive retained texture, sensation, emotion, smell, temperature, even details the original owner had consciously forgotten. By 29, my memories of Dakar had begun disappearing. That terrified me. I still remembered my mother laughing when I complained about the heat. I remembered the Atlantic. I remembered crowded roads and familiar voices and meals I had once assumed I would eat forever. But some faces were getting softer around the edges. One cousin's voice had vanished completely. There was a street near my childhood home I could describe perfectly except for its name. I had already died once. I did not want to lose my life a second time simply because my mind was slowly making space for another world. So when Professor Venn personally invited me into his private 6-person research seminar, I accepted before reading the second page. That should tell you something about me. I read everything. Contracts, footnotes, ingredient labels. Once at 17, I refused to eat a pastry because the baker could not explain why the filling was listed as regional cream. Yet Venn offered me access to deep archive research, and suddenly I discovered trust. Humiliating. The day after John disappeared, I went hunting for boring documents. The main archives were useless. Our seminar register contained 5 names. 5 rooms were assigned to the research wing. 5 stipends had been issued. Every formal record agreed. So I went downstairs to Laundry Hall 3. The laundry clerk was an elderly woman named Sina who disliked researchers because, according to her, we considered sleeves a theoretical concept. I asked how many research coats she had received after the synchrony experiment. 6. My heart stopped. Then she checked the ledger. 5. She stared at it. I could have sworn. Do you remember who brought them? No. Do you remember 6 coats? She rubbed her forehead. I remember being annoyed because one had ink on the collar. John always got ink on his collar. He chewed pen ends while reading. I asked to see the physical laundry tokens. There were 6. 5 matched names. The 6th was blank. That was when something strange happened. I touched it. Silver lines appeared around the token. They were not written on the metal. They floated at the edge of my vision like notes in an invisible margin. COPID, no. Altered, yes. Alteration depth, record layer. Source relation, primary. I nearly dropped it. I touched another token. No silver writing. Then the 6th again. The margins returned. That was what I eventually called the ability. Margin sight. It could not tell me what had been removed. It could not tell me who had done it. It did not tell me whether a statement was true. It only showed provenance. Copies. Alterations. Shared sources. Interference. In another person's hands, it might have been mildly interesting. To someone who had spent years deciding whether 3 19th-century documents were actually 3 independent sources or one man's mistake copied twice, it was terrifyingly useful. By sunset, I had found 7 traces of John. 6 laundry tokens. 6 lunch portions charged the day before the experiment. A maintenance request for 6 chair cushions. A library return cart with 6 weight impressions. A corridor cleaning report mentioning students in a sentence where the verb had been altered from a plural quantity that no longer made grammatical sense. A box containing 6 pairs of protective gloves. And a wine receipt Sam had desperately tried to hide because Ven had forbidden alcohol in the research wing. Sam looked deeply offended when I confronted him. I would remember drinking with an imaginary person. You don't remember buying 6 glasses. I remember buying 5. The receipt says 6. Pico, who had somehow followed me from Ven's office, said, "Proof." I held up the receipt. Pico stared at it. Acceptable. It was the first compliment he ever gave me. That evening, Professor Ven asked me to meet him alone. I expected denial. Instead, he took me below the college. Past the public archive. Past the restricted archive. Past a door that opened only after he pressed his hand against a stone plate and whispered his full name. The room beyond was warm. That surprised me. I had expected ancient stone and dramatic shadows. Instead, there were low lamps, polished wood, copper conduits, and hundreds of crystal vessels glowing softly along curved walls. Ven touched one. "Think of your mother," he said. I should have refused. I didn't. The room filled with her voice. Clear. Perfect. She laughed. Not a reconstruction. Not an imitation. Her laugh. My knees nearly gave out. I smelled cardamom. Dust warmed by afternoon sun. Soap. For 4 seconds I was home. Then the chamber released me. I stood shaking in the middle of another world. Ven waited. "I can preserve it," he said, "all of it." I knew there would be a price. There is always a price. What happened to John? Ven's face changed. Not guilt exactly. Something heavier. Some questions, he said, become dangerous when asked before we understand the answer. That's a very elegant way to tell me to stop. I am asking you to wait. And if I do, you will receive permanent access to this chamber. I thought of John. Then I thought of my mother's voice. I wish I could tell you I chose courage. I didn't. I said yes. For 17 days, I betrayed a man nobody remembered. That sentence sounds dramatic. Living it felt much quieter. I attended seminars. I ate breakfast. I corrected Sam when he incorrectly cited a source. I laughed when Pico challenged obviously subjective statements as unsupported claims. I spent 3 evenings inside the memory chamber, preserving pieces of Dakar. And every night, I placed John's note inside the locked bottom drawer of my desk. I told myself I was waiting. That was the respectable word. Waiting. Not hiding. Not accepting a bribe. Waiting. Then Leela ruined everything by being observant. She was sitting on the floor of our sound laboratory with copper threads stretched between her fingers when she said, "There are 6 voices." I froze. She did not look up. Her magic allowed her to store sound inside spaces. Walls remembered conversations. Wood remembered vibrations. Certain crystals could preserve music for centuries. Leela had been reconstructing our synchronization experiment from residual resonance. I said 6. She looked at me. You don't sound surprised. I made the mistake of taking too long to answer. Leela slowly lowered her hands. What do you know? Nothing certain. That wasn't my question. There are people who become louder when angry. Leela became precise. I hated that. I told her about the cup, the note, laundry hall 3, the receipts, the altered records. I did not initially tell her about Ven's offer. I got approximately 3 minutes into the story before she asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" I needed evidence. You had a note from a missing person. A person none of you remembered. So perhaps I was wrong. Leela stared at me. You don't believe that? No. Then why? I said nothing. Pico, sitting on a shelf, said proof. Leela pointed at him. Not now. Pico clicked his beak. Suspicious. I should mention that Pico was not intelligent in the normal sense. He had been built 80 years earlier to assess whether academic statements carried appropriate citations. Unfortunately, nobody had programmed him to understand when his participation was socially disastrous. Leela folded her arms. What did Ven offer you? I looked at her. She laughed once. There was no humor in it. Oh, Amadou. That hurt more than anger. I told her everything. When I described hearing my mother's voice, Leela's expression softened. That almost made it worse. I understand why you wanted it, she said. Thank you. I'm still furious. There it is. You let me spend 17 days not knowing someone had been removed from my life. I didn't know what would happen if I told you. You decided for me. That sentence followed me for months. You decided for me. The next morning we gathered Tomas, Myra, and Sam. This time I told the full story immediately. Tomas did not explode. Of course he didn't. Tomas treated emotional disasters like mathematical problems that had unexpectedly entered the room. He asked to see John's note, then the laundry tokens, then every other altered object. Myra cried. Quietly. She did not remember John, but she found a scarf in her room with repaired stitching she could not explain. His initials had disappeared. Her hands remembered repairing it anyway. Sam reacted worst. He made jokes. Too many. By lunch, he had invented 7 imaginary versions of John. John the secret prince. John the invisible janitor. John the spirit of poor tea. That evening, Sam tried to reconstruct our group using illusion. He formed 5 figures. Then stopped. 6 shadows appeared on the wall. Nobody spoke. Sam stared at them until the illusion collapsed. After that, he stopped joking about John. We began investigating together. That was when my ability changed. 3 independent records could sometimes produce an echo. I discovered it accidentally. Leela found a sound trace of John arguing in the East Corridor. Myra located a note describing the same argument. I found a repair record showing that a wall lamp had shattered at exactly that time. I placed the 3 objects together. Margin sight flared. For 4 seconds, the corridor appeared around us. Transparent. Flickering. John stood near the wall. He was tall, badly shaved, and wearing the brown coat he had constantly complained made him look like an undertaker. Across from him stood Professor Ven. John said, "You cannot make truth by deleting disagreement." Then the vision vanished. I fell. Leela caught my shoulder. Something else disappeared too. At first, I did not understand what. Then I tried to remember my primary school classroom in Dakar. I could see desks, windows, a teacher, but the color of the walls was gone. Not forgotten normally. Gone. That was the cost. Reconstruction consumed memory. My memory When I explained it, Tomas immediately said, "Then stop." No, that was not a suggestion. You don't have authority over me. I'm aware. That's why I'm using basic sense instead. Leela surprised me by agreeing with him. I expected support. Instead, she said, "You already hid things from us because you were afraid of losing your memories. Now you're destroying them yourself." I'm getting answers. At what cost? I hated that question. Mostly because I did not know. The first major breakthrough came from a teapot. Not an artifact. Not a forbidden spell. A teapot. John hated the seminar tea so much that he had secretly replaced one of Ven's expensive imported blends with cheap harbor tea for 12 straight weeks. Apparently this amused him. It also created a beautiful documentary trail. Kitchen purchases. Cup stains. A complaint from Ven. A note from Sam saying, "John, if you are going to sabotage civilization, please begin with something less obvious." And one preserved sound fragment from Leela. We combined them. This time I knew what to expect. The echo opened. John appeared sitting alone in the seminar room. He looked directly at the doorway. Then at us. Not at the people who had originally been there. At us. Amadou. The echo should not have been interactive. I nearly broke concentration. John stood. "If this is working, then you found the residual chain." John. He laughed. "Good, I was hoping it would be you. You notice stupid things." "Thank you. It was a compliment. Where are you?" His expression changed. "I don't know." "Did Ven erase you?" "No." That single answer destroyed the story I had built in my head. John stepped closer. "I sabotaged the concordance." "The what?" "Ven's project. The synchronization experiment wasn't what he told us. We weren't testing group verification. We were providing 6 incompatible observation models to a machine designed to reconcile them." "Why sabotage it?" "Because reconciliation was the problem." The echo trembled. John spoke faster. "I changed the contradiction gate. I thought it would force shutdown." "What happened?" "It solved me." I stared at him. "I don't understand." "The system encountered contradictory records attached to my interference. It couldn't reconcile them, so it removed the source of contradiction." "You?" "Yes." "Then Ven didn't plan this." John looked away. "No. That hurt differently. Ven was not the monster. Not initially." "What did he do after?" John's face hardened. "He covered it up." The image flickered. "Why?" "Because for 11 seconds, Amadou, the concordance worked. Then John vanished. The room returned. I collapsed against the table. This time I lost my cousin's voice. I could still see his face. I remembered what he used to say. I knew his laugh had once sounded a certain way. But I could not hear it anymore. Leela sat beside me. Nobody spoke. Finally Tomas said, "We need to talk to Ven." Ven did not deny anything. That almost made me respect him. He brought us into a private lecture chamber, locked the doors, and told us what the concordance was. 23 years earlier, Sola had nearly collapsed during the War of 5 Records. The name sounds ridiculous until you learn why. 5 competing governments altered historical archives using verification magic. One king changed land records to prove his family had controlled an eastern valley for 4 centuries. A rival court strengthened contradictory records. Magic began enforcing both versions. Roads shifted. Boundary stones appeared in different places, depending on which documents nearby held greater verification weight. Families remembered different ancestors. A treaty failed because half the officials involved remembered signing a different text. 300 people in one town remembered a bridge that had never been built. Ven had been there. He was 19. His younger sister disappeared from the historical record for 6 days. When she returned, their mother remembered having only one child. Contradiction nearly destroyed us, Ven said. No, John had told him in the echo. People weaponizing records nearly destroyed you. Ven looked at me sharply when I repeated that. John always preferred moral simplicity. John sabotaged your machine. He did, and you erased the evidence afterward. I prevented panic while determining whether he could be restored. For 17 days. For 6 months if necessary. Leela stood. You let us forget him. Ven's voice remained soft. I did not make you forget him. But you used it. That was the important distinction. Ven had not caused the disaster. He had simply found it useful. For 11 seconds, the concordance had taken thousands of contradictory records and produced a perfectly stable verified reality. No magical disputes. No competing histories. No instability. 11 seconds. Enough to convince Ven his life's work was possible. Tomas asked the question I did not want anyone asking. Could the flaw be fixed? Ven looked at him. Yes. I turned toward Tomas. He did not apologize. He studied the diagrams. What happened to John was caused by the contradiction gate accepting a person as removable evidence. Restrict that operation to recorded claims only. You cannot be serious, Leela said. I'm asking. You want to restart it. I want to understand whether it can be made safe. That was the beginning of the split. Tomas believed dangerous knowledge became safer through better understanding. Leela believed some experiments should stop when they erase your colleague from existence. Myra stood between them because Veyra funded the healing program keeping her younger brother alive. Sam wanted us to remain friends, which sounds harmless until you understand how much bad behavior people will tolerate to avoid choosing sides. And I was supposed to be the principled one. Except Ven still had my memories. That made me very easy to manipulate. For another month, we lived like people carrying glass inside our clothes. Carefully, Tomas began assisting Ven. At first openly. He argued that someone had to understand the machine well enough to stop it if necessary. Then he stopped telling us everything. That should have felt familiar. It did. I hated him for doing exactly what I had done. Myra helped with memory safeguards. Sam tested shared perception. Leela refused all direct participation. I investigated. Our conversations became polite. Polite is a dangerous stage in friendship. Anger means people still expect something from you. Politeness means they have started adjusting to disappointment. Meanwhile, my margin sight improved. I learned that not all records carried equal verification weight. Original records mattered more than copies. Independent accounts mattered more than repeated ones. Emotional intensity affected memory magic, but not documentary verification. Official seals increased authority only if the institution itself possessed verified legitimacy. That discovery made me laugh for almost a minute. The most powerful magical archive in the kingdom was, on some level, still vulnerable to paperwork. My second major breakthrough happened inside a baker's shop in Cairo. 2 customers argued over whether the owner had always sold almond cakes on Thursdays. One swore yes. The other swore no. Ordinary disagreement. Except the baker suddenly said, "No, she's right. We have always sold them." His wife came from the kitchen. She disagreed. Then blinked. "No, of course, Thursdays." I touched an old menu. Margin sight flared. Altered passive convergence. I felt cold. The concordance was not active. At least officially. Yet small contradictions across Cairo were resolving themselves. I spent 3 days checking. A dock ledger whose 2 copies had disagreed, over 14 crates now matched. 2 brothers who had argued for years about where their father was buried suddenly remembered the same location. A famous recipe had once had 3 regional variations. Now every cookbook described one. Most people considered the changes improvements. Fewer disputes. Cleaner records. Easier magic. Then I visited an elementary school. Children had been asked to draw the harbor from memory. 27 drawings. Every lighthouse leaned at exactly the same angle. Every ship faced west. Every cloud had 3 curved edges. Children do not remember like that. People do not remember like that. I returned to Veyra furious. Tomas met me in the lower corridor. "You restarted it." "No. The city is converging." His face changed. "We haven't activated the core." "Then explain this." I showed him the drawings. He studied them for a long time. Adaptive residue. What? The archive may have learned the function. Learned. Magical systems can retain operational preference. Operational preference. Tomas, children are remembering the same clouds. I see that. You don't sound sufficiently alarmed. I am trying not to panic before understanding the mechanism. That's Ven's voice. That landed. He looked at me. And you sound like John. Good. You didn't even like John. That landed harder. He was right. I remembered John interrupting people. John treating disagreement as a competitive sport. John once telling me my filing system reflected the emotional repression of a minor bureaucratic god. I had nearly thrown a folder at him. I did not love John. That made remembering him more important, not less. Dead or missing people should not require sainthood to deserve existence. "We stop everything," I said. Tomas shook his head. "If we shut it down incorrectly, the residue may continue without control. So we destroy the archive." Myra had approached behind him. I had not heard her. "No," she said. Her voice broke. Veyra's archive supported half the advanced healing systems in Cairo, including her brother's. Destroying it might restore contradictory records. It might also collapse thousands of linked spells. I had been thinking like Ven. One system. One solution. One acceptable loss. That realization should have made me wiser. Instead, I became more secretive. I started working alone. Again. Leela confronted me after midnight. "You promised." "I promised what?" "That you wouldn't decide everything by yourself." "I'm not." "Where were you yesterday?" "Cairo." "Doing what?" "Research." "Amadou." I snapped. "What do you want from me?" "The truth." "I am giving you the truth." "No, you're giving me selected pieces after you've decided what I can handle." I stood. Because every time I tell someone something, they use it for their own agenda. Ven uses information. Tomas uses information. Myra has reasons to protect Veyra. Sam wants everyone happy. You want me to confess every thought before I've finished having it. Leela went quiet. I knew immediately I had gone too far. She said, "You don't trust people, you archive them." Then she left. That night, I entered the memory chamber alone. I listened to my mother laugh. And for the first time, the memory felt less like home and more like evidence locked in a vault. 2 days later, Tomas betrayed me. I say that knowing he would describe it differently. He called it intervention. Myra called it temporary stabilization. Sam called it a truly terrible plan, which did not stop him participating. They invited me into Laboratory 4. I knew something was wrong because Sam had prepared tea. Sam did not prepare tea. Sam acquired beverages by appearing near other people's beverages until generosity occurred. Leela was absent. That was the second warning. Myra asked me to sit. No. Tomas sighed. We need to talk. You've never said that before doing anything pleasant. Pico. From Tomas's desk said proof. Look around. Acceptable. Tomas told me the concordance would be activated in 3 days. Not fully. A controlled test. 1 minute. My margin sight, combined with my outsider soul, created a problem. The system could not predict me properly. Ven believed my continued fixation on John might introduce destabilizing contradictions. So what? I asked. Myra looked sick. We want to dampen your John memories temporarily. I laughed. Nobody joined me. You want to remove him from my memory. 48 hours, Tomas said. No. Amadou. No. It would return. You don't know that. We have safeguards. You mean the safeguards built by the people who accidentally deleted a man? Sam rubbed his face. When you say it like that, it sounds worse. How else would I say it? Tomas stepped closer. You are destroying your original life memories using reconstruction. You're barely sleeping. You refuse to share your research. You suggested destroying an archive supporting thousands of people. Tell me I'm wrong. He wasn't. That made me angrier. Myra said, we are trying to protect you. There it was. The sentence everyone uses when they want authority over someone else's mind. I turned toward the door. It locked. I stared at Sam. His shared perception magic shimmered around the frame. Seriously. I'm sorry. No, you're uncomfortable. That's different. Myra activated the memory lattice. I felt silver pressure inside my head. Then everything broke. Not me. The lattice. My reincarnated memories did not connect to this world's verification structure correctly. The spell reached for John. Instead it touched Dakar. I heard my mother's voice scream through 29 years of memory. The laboratory windows shattered outward. Nobody was injured. But I lost 3 memories instantly. The name of my first teacher, a friend's face, and the exact route from my childhood home to the sea. I stood in the middle of broken glass, shaking so badly I could not close my hands. Tomas whispered my name. I looked at him. I told you no. That ended our friendship. At least for a while. Leela found me sitting on the western stairs before sunrise. I told her what happened. She did not say she had warned me. She sat beside me. After a long silence, I said, I can't remember the road. What road? Home. She waited. So I described it. What I still remembered. A corner shop. A wall. A tree that leaned over a gate. A place where water gathered after rain. Leela listened. Then repeated it back. Not perfectly. She got the order wrong. I corrected her. She tried again. That was the moment something shifted. For months, I had believed preservation meant creating a perfect copy. A vault, a record nobody could alter. But my first life had never been preserved that way. Stories changed slightly each time my family told them. People remembered the same day differently. One person forgot what another remembered. We corrected each other, argued, added details, lost details. The memory survived because it was distributed, not because it was perfect. I stood so quickly Leela nearly fell off the stair. What? Ven is solving the wrong problem. She stared at me. I assumed this realization required almost knocking me down. Contradiction isn't damage. I know. No, magically. I ran. She followed. We spent 16 hours comparing records. The War of Five Records had not become catastrophic because contradictory histories existed. Contradictions existed everywhere. The catastrophe began when governments increased verification pressure until their preferred histories overwhelmed competing records. Normal contradiction acted like resistance, a safety barrier. Thousands of imperfect independent memories prevented any single version from gaining complete authority. Ven's machine removed that resistance. The concordance was not discovering truth. It was creating monopoly. Whoever controlled its weighting system could eventually decide what counted as reality. And the archive had already learned to prefer consensus. We needed Tomas. I hated that. But he understood probability architecture better than anyone alive except Ven. So I found him. He looked exhausted. Are you here to shout? No. That's concerning. I'm here because you're wrong. Much more familiar. I showed him the model. He argued for 20 minutes. Then stopped. Then recalculated. Then sat down. What if you're right? I am. Pico said proof. I pointed at the equations. Tomas stared at the brass bird. I have never hated an object this much. Pico said, unsupported emotional claim. For the first time in days, I laughed. Then Tomas said, activation is tomorrow. I stopped laughing. We had 21 hours. Destroying the concordance was impossible. Destroying the archive was unacceptable. Simply switching the machine off might leave the passive convergence running. So we needed to change what the system believed its purpose was. That required feeding it contradiction. Not false contradiction. Real disagreement. Independent evidence. Millions of minor differences. The exact things archives usually cleaned up. Sam found us first. He expected me to refuse to speak to him. I almost did. Then I remembered what Leela had said. I archived people. So I told him everything. He listened. When I finished, he said, I was wrong. Yes. I thought there would be more resistance. I'm tired. I helped them try to edit your mind. Yes. I am sorry. I looked at him. Help us. His shared perception magic could distribute evidence across thousands of minds simultaneously. Myra arrived next. She was harder. Her brother's life was still tied to Veyra systems. I promised we would isolate medical infrastructure before touching the central archive. She did not trust my promise. Good. She demanded technical proof. Better. We spent 3 hours building separation buffers. At dawn, all 5 of us stood outside Professor Vin's chamber. For a moment, it almost felt like the old group. Then I noticed the empty space where John should have been. Vin listened to our argument. He understood it immediately. That was the frightening thing about him. He did not dismiss us because he was stupid. He disagreed because he had spent 23 years building a philosophy around certainty. "You are proposing institutionalized ambiguity," he said. "I'm proposing reality. People manipulate disagreement. People manipulate consensus too. The war happened because nobody could establish authoritative truth. The war happened because powerful people wanted reality to obey them. And what happens when plague records disagree, when bridge measurements disagree, when medical histories disagree? We investigate. And while you investigate, people die." He was right. Sometimes consensus saves lives. That was the strongest point he ever made. But then he made his mistake. "Human beings," Venn said, "have demonstrated repeatedly that they cannot be trusted to preserve reality responsibly." Leela asked, "So you will do it for them?" "If necessary." There it was. Not science. Authority. The person controlling the machine would eventually become the final editor of reality. Venn offered me a place beside him. He activated the memory chamber. Dakar surrounded me. My mother's kitchen. Her voice. Sunlight. I could smell everything. "Your soul resists this world's verification structure," Venn said. "You can stabilize the concordance in ways none of us can. Help me, and every memory you have ever feared losing will remain intact." I wanted it. That is important. There was no moment where temptation vanished because I'd grown morally pure. I wanted my home back so badly my chest hurt. I looked at Leela. She said nothing. Good. The choice had to be mine. I walked through the memory of my mother's kitchen, touched a chair that was not really there, listened to a laugh produced from a moment I had already lived. Then I noticed something. The memory was perfect. Too perfect. No disagreement. No missing details. No uncertainty. It was no longer alive. It was preserved. Like an insect inside amber. I stepped away. "No." Venn's face tightened. "You will lose them. Some. Eventually, perhaps all. Maybe. And you accept that." "No." That surprised him. "I hate it." I looked at the false kitchen. "But I don't get to make everyone else's world smaller because I'm afraid of forgetting mine." The concordance activated at noon. You know how people describe reality bending? Usually they mean dramatic things. Walls melting. Sky splitting. Gravity revering. The concordance was worse. Nothing looked wrong. Everything simply became easier. The central chamber contained 12 concentric rings of silver script rotating around a black crystal core. Venn stood inside the inner ring. Tomas took the probability station. Myra controlled memory buffering. Sam linked perception. Leela distributed sound records. I stood at the archive interface with both hands against cold stone. For the first 30 seconds, the machine behaved beautifully. Duplicate records aligned. Conflicting dates resolved. Broken spell chains stabilized. Across Caro, magical efficiency increased by 11%. Then Leela forgot why she was angry with Tomas. I knew because she looked at him and smiled. Not forgiveness. Absence. Leela. She blinked. What? What did Tomas do? Her expression emptied. I don't know. Tomas went pale. Shut it down. Venn said, hold. Professor. Hold. The machine had begun identifying emotional disagreement as unstable verification. John's remaining traces started disappearing. I felt it in the note inside my pocket. The paper became smooth. His handwriting faded. Myra whispered, "Who is John?" Sam looked around. "Why are there 6 stations?" There were 6 stations. 5 people. I pressed margin sight into the archive. Pain hit immediately. Millions of records opened around me. Birth certificates, recipes, private letters, weather logs, songs, doc inventories, children's drawings, court testimony, love letters, bad poetry, extremely bad poetry. One man in Cairo had apparently written 73 poems comparing a woman's eyes to maritime equipment. History contained many crimes. I began cross-indexing. The machine resisted. I fed it contradictory harbor records. 3 maps showing different shorelines. 4 family accounts of the same wedding. 9 recipes for one stew. 2 teachers remembering the same student differently. Hundreds of eyewitness reports. The concordance tried to select winners. I stopped it. That was my 3rd breakthrough. Contradiction holding. For 20 seconds, 2 verified histories could coexist. The Western Archive door was locked. The Western Archive door was unlocked. Both statements became true. The door shimmered between states. My head felt like it would split. Tomas understood immediately. "Amadou, you cannot hold this at scale." "I don't need to." "Then what are you doing?" "Teaching it." We had misunderstood the concordance because Venn had built it around one question. Which version is true? I changed the question. Which versions possess sufficient independent support to coexist? Venn realized what I was doing. "No." He moved toward the control ring. Tomas blocked the probability channel. Venn stared at him. Tomas. Tomas looked sick. This was the decision that mattered. He had spent months defending Venn. He still believed certainty could save lives. But probability showed him what the next hour looked like. I saw it reflected in his face. A stable world. Efficient. Peaceful. Predictable. Gradually narrower. One history. One accepted interpretation. One set of choices accumulating enough verification power to suppress every alternative. "What probability of survival?" I asked. Tomas whispered, "High." "And freedom." He closed his eyes, then redirected the probability flow into my model. Then shouted. The machine opened. Not physically. Conceptually. Millions of disagreements flooded the archive. Leela released stored conversations. Sam connected perception. Myra allowed memories to remain inconsistent instead of forcing synchronization. Tomas prevented one version from statistically dominating. And I held contradictions long enough for the archive to learn they were not errors. John appeared. Not completely. For 3 seconds he stood beside the 6th station. "What did I miss?" Sam screamed. John looked offended. "That seems excessive." Then he vanished again. But this time the station remembered him. Then the floor. Then the registers. Then us. Myra gasped. "John." Leela began crying. Sam laughed so hard he had to sit down. The concordance stopped collapsing difference. Its rings slowed. The black core changed. Silver lines spread through it like branching cracks. Not broken. Rewritten. Pico, who had somehow entered the chamber despite every security protocol at Veyra, flew onto the central console. Venn stared at the machine. Decades of work had become something else. Pico tilted his head. Proof. Vin sat down. For once he had none. John returned in pieces. That sounds worse than I mean. His body was unharmed. He simply arrived with an incomplete relationship to history. His family remembered having a son. His school records returned. His debts returned too, which John considered evidence that the universe possessed a personal grudge. But memories varied. Sam remembered meeting him at Veyra, but not the first conversation. Myra remembered repairing his scarf. Leela remembered laughing with him in the music hall, but could not remember why. Tomas remembered nearly every argument. John said this was because Tomas was incapable of letting disagreements die naturally. Tomas said, "You were erased from existence and returned specifically to annoy me." John replied, "I like having purpose." My own memories of him were the most complete. That came with a price. By the time the concordance stabilized, I had lost dozens of details from Dakar. I could no longer remember my first teacher's name. I lost the voice of one cousin. The route to the sea remained incomplete. One meal my mother used to make survived only as taste without image. For weeks, that grief felt like failure. Then strange things started happening. Leela would mention the leaning tree from the road I had described. Myra remembered the song I had taught her. Sam could imitate the way I described one particular Dakar shopkeeper, despite never having met him. Even Tomas remembered details I had forgotten telling him. My memories had moved. Not magically. Humanly. That mattered more. Professor Venn did not go to prison. Some people were angry about that. I understood. But removing him from history would have been absurdly hypocritical. The college stripped him of independent research authority. Every concordance experiment required 6 outside reviewers from different institutions. Not 5. John insisted on that. Venn also had to spend 3 years helping restore contradictory archives damaged by passive convergence. He hated the work because it involved preserving disputes he considered inefficient. I found that satisfying. Not because he suffered, because every day he had to protect the exact thing he had tried to eliminate. Tomas lost his research leadership position for concealing the activation schedule. Myra received a formal sanction, but retained access to the healing program after cooperating with investigators. Sam received 6 months of ethics supervision. He described this as being professionally followed by disappointment. Leela received no sanction. She enjoyed reminding us. I did not escape consequences either. My agreement with Venn became public. So did the fact that I had hidden John's existence for 17 days in exchange for memory chamber access. Some people expected me to defend myself. I didn't. The truth was ugly enough without decoration. John asked me about it once. We were sitting on the cliff above Caro. You traded me for your memories. Yes. That's awful. Yes. He considered this. Would you do it again? No. Immediately. I thought about it. No. He smiled. Good answer. That was John. Forgiveness required accurate documentation. Months later, the 6 of us sat in our old seminar room. 6 cups waited on the table. John entered last. He placed a 7th cup beside his own. Sam stared at it. Why? Contingency. For what? In case one of you gets erased again. Pico flew down. He inspected the cup. Then John. Proof. John pointed at himself. I literally disappeared. Pico considered this insufficient evidence. We laughed, all six of us, not because everything had been repaired. It hadn't. Tomas and I were rebuilding trust slowly. Leela still became quiet sometimes when she remembered what I had hidden. Myra's brother remained ill. Ven remained, convinced that history would eventually prove parts of his argument correct. John occasionally found objects from his old life that meant nothing to him. And I continued forgetting Dakar. Not quickly, not completely, just enough to remind me that memory is mortal. I still visit the deep archive. The concordance remains there too. But its purpose has changed. It does not decide which history wins. It preserves relationships between competing records. Researchers now study disagreement as carefully as agreement. A disputed memory is no longer considered a damaged memory. Sometimes it is simply evidence that more than one person lived through the same moment. I keep notebooks. Of course I do. I am still me. But I no longer lock everything important inside them. I tell stories. I repeat names. I cook imperfect versions of meals I remember. I correct Leela when she gets details wrong. Sometimes she refuses the correction because she insists her version is funnier. That used to bother me. Now I think about my first life. My second life. John's missing life. Ven's perfect history. And the machine that nearly made reality consistent enough to destroy it. I came to Veyra believing memory survived when someone protected the original. I was wrong. The original can burn. A mind can fail. An archive can lie. Magic can rewrite a record. What survives longest is what moves between people. Different copies, different voices, different memories, different truths rubbing against one another hard enough that no single person gets to own the whole past. I was reincarnated once, but that was not what gave me a second life. Sharing the first one did. And if I learned anything from watching the most powerful archive in the world nearly erase a man because he did not fit neatly into its answer, it is this. When reality offers you one perfect version of the truth, count the cups before you believe it.